Atop the wall, the wind sang its thin and endless song, a knife's whisper against the ice. Lanterns burned along the walkway where the night's rime had rimmed every iron brace in hoarfrost. Jon stood with one glove off, palm flat to the frozen crenel, and let the cold bite him clean to the bone. Ghost's white flank pressed warm against his thighs, a low rumble in the direwolf's chest like a distant drum under snow. Eastwatch had sent ravens before dawn. Cotter Pike wrote the way a man fought, blunt, sparing, salted with curses. Dead things in the pines, the letter said, dead things on the water. Send ships or send fire or send the stranger himself, else leave us be and forget this place. The ink had blotted where a drop of melted snow fell and froze again, the words captured in a bruise of black. Jon folded the parchment into squared neatness and slipped it into his belt. The wind toyed with a lock of hair at his brow and tugged his cloak against his neck as if it, too, wanted his attention. Below, Castle Black clung to the wall's heel in lights and moving shadows. Men trod the courtyards with hunched shoulders, smoke curled from chimneys, and from the gatehouse rose the rough-throated cheer of a company just returned. He had known before the bells. Ghost's head had lifted, ears pricking toward the north like the hands of a clock that had found true noon. She was back. He did not run. He went steady, the way snow falls, relentless, quiet, sure. Ed slid in beside him at the top of the stairs, face raw from the wind. Just our luck, Dolorous Ed said, tone as flat as a bare plane. The wildling princess returns and finds us all handsome. Best warn the men they'll be disappointed. She's no princess, Jon said, though the Southrons loved the word and Stannis had used it like a nail to pound through boards. Don't tell the Southern Knights. They love a title even more than hot wine. Ed blew on his hands, watched his breath coil pale. You mean to go greet her? I mean to go greet our allies. Jon's knuckles tightened within the glove, then loosened. Tormund will have brought those he could turn from the frost. We'll need to count fires, food, a place for those with little ones. Do we count the knights too, or do they count us? Ed asked, glumly philosophical. King Stannis has his own tallies. He's been tallying Val, if you take my meaning. Jon did not answer. Ghost's paws whispered on the tower stairs as they descended. She stood in the shadow of the open gate, wrapped not in southern furs but lean northern hides that knew wind and knew what the wind could steal. Her hair was the pale of hawk feather, not snow white but with the gleam of sun on frost. A long braid sat over one shoulder, threaded with bone beads. Her eyes were level and bright. The men around her were broad and narrow and scarred, some boys with brand new beards, some with faces like old tree bark. They smelled of pine pitch and cold iron and the smoke of bitter wood. And with them, one rose above all, ice shining in his beard, a tower of flesh whose breath steamed like a forge. The gate made him stoop. Tormund Giant's Bane, Jon called, stepping into the yard's light. Lady Val. Pretty words, Val returned. She smiled with most of her teeth, bright and swift. Say them for a Southron lord and he'll call it fealty. Say them for me and I call it courtesy. Your wall still stands, Crow. Thanks to those who help guard it, Jon said. You're late. Can you be late to outrun the dead? Tormund boomed, emerging with a shake like a dog. He clapped Jon's shoulder hard enough to jolt him. Snow, you smell the cold in my beard? There's worse behind it. We brought what we could pry loose from valley and ravine and half-frozen stream. The forest sings for winter. I don't like her song. You never did like music, Val told him, and then, turning to Jon, you sent me to fetch a man who makes songs. You sent me to bring a boast. I brought more than that. Her gaze slid past Jon to the far side of the yard. The red woman stood there wrapped in her night-black cloak, the strange copper sheen of her hair drinking firelight. The ruby at Melisandre's throat smoldered, a coal in breathing flesh. She did not blink. Val's mouth moved with distaste. The fire witch watches. Tell her to look to her own flames. She won't like what they show her. She sees what she sees, Jon said quietly. Then she's blind half the time, and I'll take the other half for my own. Val's eyes came back to him, quick as a bird's. You have the look of a man who slept and dreamed of razors. I haven't been sleeping, Jon said. That too. She tipped her head, and the beads clicked like teeth. We'll speak later. They unpacked in the hard light of cold torches. The free folk wound through the yards as streams through roots. Men of the watch watched them with hard mouths, some with hands on hilts. From the king's lodge rose the stiff shapes of knights and men-at-arms, bright in polished steel that drank moon. Lord Commander, the look said, but said it with suspicion, respect, fear, derision, hope, the way a crowd speaks. Jon marked each with a part of his mind that had learned to tally rations and arrows while another part listened for the scrape of blades. Tormund came to him later with a skin of sour goat's milk and a grin that could have been warmth or a baring of teeth. We brought your singer, he said, the Lord in bones. You burned him, you said. The king burned him, the red which burned him. One of you South knowers did the burning. Yet here is Rattleshirt, and I think he sings now too. Jon stilled. He kept his voice low. Where? In shadows. Tormund scratched at his beard. That's where crows go to, hiding in their own night. Keep him there, Jon said, until I say different. His eyes found the red woman across the yard, and he saw the corner of Melisandre's mouth move, as if at a joke told in a language other than his own. Keeping Mance close to him meant keeping her closer still. Inside the old hall, heat pressed hard and sweet. Stannis sat at the head of the long table with his sword laid before him like a man's argument in steel. The king's mouth was the same flat line as always. The hint of frost at the edge of his lashes might have been white sprinkled by age. He nodded to Tormund, slow as grudged bread, and let his gaze drag to Val, assessing, measuring, claiming, the way men in mail learned to look at land. Lady Val, Stannis said. Man Stannis, Val said with a smile that wasn't. My sister called you king. The forest calls you stranger. You will learn to call me what is due. Stannis lifted his cup and drank like a man swallowing a bitter draught because it cured. Lord Commander Snow, you had word from Eastwatch. Dead things in the pines. And on the water. Jon did not sit until Stannis gestured. Ghost lay down by his boots with a heavy sigh, the kind that was half vigilance. Cotter speaks of a force gathering along the shore. Not raiders, not rangers, nothing with breath. We should go, Val said at once. They will make a shore of bones if we leave those folk to drown. We will go, Jon said, and heard how the room took that we, turning it over with teeth. But we must know what we can carry and what we can leave. Our horses are starved. Our ships few. Men are sleeping shoulder to shoulder in cellars. We need to take them off in tides. Send the first ravens to the castles holding grain. Ask the umbers for wains. Manderley's fat ships would not go amiss if he has them. The fat lord cares for his own fat belly, Stannis said. He will not risk it for your wildlings. He will, Jon said. The memory rose sharp of white towers and a great green harbor, and the dignity in Lord Wyman's bow despite all his loss. Not for us, for the North. He remembers. Your memory's a softness. Stannis did not spit the word softness, which made it worse. The Umbers have split, the Karstarks have turned. The mountain clans are craven when hungry. If I am to win them, I will need more than your letters. I will need marriages. I will need oaths bound by something thicker than words. Bind your own, Val said, and there was no humility in it. The true oaths are made with skin and snow and watching eyes in trees. Your Lawler doesn't have those. Lady Val, the king said, as if the words themselves cost him restraint. You are a valuable piece upon the board. I intend to place you well. Sir Justin speaks of you more than he speaks of his prayers. A match to a good knight is an honorable outcome. I am no man's placement, Val said. She looked to Jon as if to see whether he had heard. And I'll not be traded like a horse. Jon felt the cold again. A deep piece of it laid in his chest. No one will trade you, he said. You are under my protection while you are at the wall. A simple sentence, like a thrown line, no weight in its words when held up against the duties that dogged each syllable. Yet it pushed at something in him that would not bend. Melisandre watched him. Her eyes were coals. When the hall had emptied to the soft thunder of men seeking pallets and drink, she came to him near the brazier framing shadows on the floor. "You felt it," she said. "I felt nothing that had a name." "You accepted a name when you were born," Melisandre said. "You carry an unkind one now, and another waits in the air about you. My fires show a man crowned with storm who is not the storm, a wolf with a white bride whose hair is winter's breath, a sword in darkness that is not light but cuts all the same. If you wear one crown, you must set another down." "You see much," Jon said, "and not enough." For once, the admission sounded human, not like savagery cloaked in sweetness. "You could have had Winterfell from Stannis as a gift of parchment. You did not take it. If you are to take a bride as well, you cannot be what you are." "There are vows," Jon said. Between him and the brazier, the air shimmered as if made of water. "There are lives bound to those vows." "There is winter," Melisandre said. "Winter keeps none of yours. That is not a prophecy. That is the sky outside your door." He lay sleepless while Ghost stood in the open doorway like a watchman carved of moon. He thought of Ygritte's laugh, and the taste of rain, and the little cave that had cheated the world for an hour by forgetting it existed. He thought of the last words she had given him with the last of her breath and shook them away because he was not that boy any longer and because the words would cripple him if he let them. At dawn, Val went to the trees outside the gate. Bristled black shapes bent under snow load and laced up her boots and climbed. Jon saw her from the parapet. A pale thread against bark, the economy of her movements betraying long practice. She came as high as the first spread of branches, perched like a hawk, and watched east. He went to meet her when she dropped. "It smells like knives," she said, sniffing the air. "Do your Southrons never breathe without wine?" "Not in winter." He remembered a day with Sam in the library, a sunbeam that had found its way under the shutters. Remembered another with Robb along the Wintertown's lanes when the smell was wood smoke and horse. "You brought more than Tormund." "I brought a song hidden in bones," she said. There was a grin behind her words. "Do you know why I went for him? Because I asked." Sounded feeble. "Because you asked," she agreed. "And because I knew better than you what would happen if he stayed in irons and the kings which drank his blood out of a cup. I don't like the taste of that future. I like the taste of this one better." She took a breath that seemed to take the air out of the space between them, then let it go. "He'll do your asking, sly, angry, singing the while. We will need sly and angry for the work ahead." "The work ahead," Jon repeated softly. The phrase had a weight like a mail shirt. She looked at him for a long moment, face made keen by the cold. "You stand with one boot on ice and one on stone. The ice will take you. The stone will not give. How will you walk?" "I don't know," Jon admitted. He had learned to pretend knowledge in command, to borrow the very tone of it until men believed. With her, he found himself shrugging off the borrowed cloak and standing in his own skin. "I know what needs doing. Eastwatch needs ships and men. The North needs to be roused against men who would call themselves lords of winter and burn it from hearth to hall. And beyond the trees the dead move. To fight them we need every hand. And the Watch learned to count hands that belong to Southrons, not to free folk," she said. "Your brothers count like men counting arrows. They will forgive your charity until you ask them to bow their heads to new gods." "I will ask no one to bow." He met her gaze. "I will ask them to live, and to let you live. All of you." She studied him. "You've a good mouth for a liar," she said at last, not unkindly. "You sound like you believe it. The world I know doesn't bend for good mouths. It bends for men and women who make it if they have time. We are short of that." Jon touched the hilt of Longclaw where the wolf's pommel butted his palm. "There is a way to make the Watch less of a stone in this road. You will not make it." Her nose wrinkled. "You will leave it." He stared at the frost on the rim of the gate. "If I leave it, I break my word. If you stay, you break the world." Her voice had softened, unexpected as sun on icicles. Southron vows are a net. You got caught young. Most of you do. How long do you stand there thrashing when the water's turning your lips blue? He looked at her, and for a moment the yard went very quiet under the small noises of men about their work. He could hear the world chewing on its own ice. Come, she said. There'll be enough talk with kings and crows. If you mean to go to the shore and bring back those who still breathe, teach your men to carry children and not drop them. Find ships. Ask the big one to lift beams. If you mean to go south and set a burning hall to rights, count the axes and the bellies to be filled. And then, a flash of teeth. Then do what you've decided already, Snow. He went first to the ships, and then to the lords, and then to the men who had not asked to be anything but cold and hungry and alive. He called the captains to him, Borkas of the Blackbird, Varen's spear-wife with knuckles like knots, a fisherman from the Shadow Tower who had the sea in his eyes. The day sharpened into a sequence of words bitten off and swallowed like soldiers' biscuits. By nightfall, he had a list of men who could row and men who could carry and men who had skill with knots. He had found space in the castle's tumbled towers, broken out a store of sour oats that had been left to sprout rats, and ordered it ground into porridge. He had sent 3 ravens, the Umbers, the Manderleys, the Serwins, and a 4th to Old Town in his heart that he did not write, because it would be madness to beg salt ships from a city that counted books dearer than blood. And then he called his officers to him in the old common hall. They came with faces he had learned like landscapes. Yarwick's plains and ridges, the tightness around Bowen Marsh's mouth, Septon Celador's eyes like 2 blunted coins. Ed stood at his right hand and said nothing. Jon's words were brief. They had to be. The longer a blade, the more likely it would bend. The wall was raised to keep the living safe from what stalks the other side, he said. It was not raised to measure our pride. The free folk have bent before our doors. If we leave them to die at Hardhome, the dead will swell with their number and march on us. If we bring them through, we can put axes in their hands and meat in their pots, and they will fight for the same fire we huddle around. So we will go to Eastwatch. We will bring them off. And when your wildling princess complains of her accommodations, Bowen said, each word a neat cut, will you offer her your own pallet, Lord Commander? The room held its breath. She has her own fire, Jon said. She needs no pallet of mine. Until she does, Bowen said. Until she stays. Until you ask us to bend our knees in a place where we do not kneel. I will ask no man to kneel, Jon repeated. We kneel before the wall and the winter and nothing else. But I will make this clear. If you put a blade in a woman's back after she has bent to our gate, you make yourself a traitor to the living. And I will hang traitors. Bold words from a boy, Othel Yarwick muttered. Bold work tomorrow, Jon said. Be ready. They left in a scraping of benches, a shuffle of boots. Bowen remained, hard eyes steady. I pledged my life to the Night's Watch, he said. Not to your northern notions. Not to a wildling whore with a pretty braid. Jon felt heat flash brief and bright and ugly behind his eyes. He set it down. You pledged your life to guard men, he said. She is a man's sister. She is a mother's daughter. She is as much a soul as you are. The language of your oath does not permit the word whore. The language of our oath forbids wives, Bowen said. The language of our oath forbids wives. Jon agreed softly, and saw Marsh's eyes narrow as if he had scented the flesh of some deeper word. Ghosts stirred, and Jon set a hand on the direwolf's neck to still him. Good night, Bowen. He walked under the wall's shadow until his legs cooled. The moon had gone thin, a strip of bone. He found himself at the little godswood huddled within the palisade. 3 black trees and a red one, only the red with leaves, its face hacked long ago by dull knives that had made a parody of watching. The pool under it had glazed to ice, but the eye of the tree looked through it with a knowing that left his spine prickling. He knelt and put his palm to the frozen surface and left it there until the skin burned. I took no wife, he thought. Promised it. When a man speaks into a cold morning with no one there to hear him, it is easy to be noble. When a woman stands before him who could bind two peoples, that is different work. Old gods, he said aloud, and his voice sounded twice in the space, once in his mouth and once under the ice. You know what I want. I ask for what is needed. He slept finally near dawn, fitful and coarse, and dreamed of a wooden hall where bread steamed and laughter rose like smoke, and a hand reached to touch his cheek that was calloused from spearwork and smelled of pine. He woke with ghosts' wet nose against his neck and the ravens in the rookery screaming like men who had seen a blade. The day bore him up and out. The weeks after Eastwatch ate them like wolves eat bones. Crunch and swallow, little left to remember the shape. Eastwatch itself was a freezing with a harbor scraped raw by ice minnows sharpening themselves on the hulls. They rowed until their hands bled and the salt dried into crust at their lips. The first boats came back dull-eyed with refugees that were more bone than flesh. The second came back with too few oars left to pull. The third did not come back at all, only the sound of them beating upon the fog, and then that sound broke as if someone had snapped a long reed. On the fourth journey Val went. She made the choice without fuss. You can count boats, she told Jon. You can count bellies. You cannot count fear. I can. The dead won't count you, he said. They'll take you as easily as any other. They can try. Her palm brushed the direwolf's shoulder. Keep the big white close. He scares what has breath. Maybe he scares what doesn't. He did not like the knot that tightened in his throat when the cutter slipped from the dock with her aboard, backed by oars in water that looked like hammered tin. She sat forward, braid coiled round her neck, with a look of concentration that made her seem like a woman rowing the world, not a small streak of wood-threading fog. When she came back in the last light, she came with 3 new boats tied behind hers, 2 towed by ropes held in the teeth of boys too thin for hunger and too stubborn for drowning. The people on those rafts were gray with cold but had most of their fingers. Val stepped out, took a bold breath, and laughed at the sky. They'll follow, she rasped, voice wrung out by wind. Tomorrow, another tide, and another. Their chief said they would not bend to a crow. I told him I was no crow, but I was married to one. He liked it less than the cold, which made it good. The word snagged. She had thrown it like bait or challenge or mercy. He watched it swim. You are not married to a crow, Jon said. Not yet, she said, and looked down at her hands to unlash a rope. The small, pleased smile at her mouth gone quickly. We can fix that. He had thought he would speak with her in some quiet corner over spiced wine and the smell of wet fur and hot iron, that he would unspool his thoughts with a care that would do them credit. Instead, the word had bitten, and the flesh around it ached, and he could not pretend it had not happened. He left at once for the King's Lodge. Stannis felt for the groove his outrage would take, and found it soon enough. You will not do this, he said once Jon had laid out what lay before him. You belong to the Night's Watch. I belong to the living, Jon said. You belong to your words. Ido. I obeyed them while I could. If I continue to obey them now, men die. And when you are king, Stannis said, will you throw away the vows you swear on that day's dawn as you throw away these? Or will you decide that kings keep their words and men die for that instead? What good is a man who cannot bind himself? Binding myself to a vow is one way to serve the realm, Jon said, feeling the old pride take its stance and then set it away, breathe and go on. Binding 2 peoples in a marriage is another. The watch will not break for my leaving, if I do this right. It will be stronger because the dead will have fewer to feast on. If you need the North, this is how you get it. Not with fire and sermons, but with bread and midnight words and children sleeping in cottages. Bread is a poor banner, Stannis said. It's one men will march under for longer than a year, Jon answered. Melisandre stood near the king's shoulder and watched him. Let him go, she said, surprising them both. You offered him Winterfell once. He scorned you. Offer him again. Bind your paper crown to his winter wife. He will wear it better than Justin wears his songs. Lady Val is not yours, Melisandre said gently. Nothing born of winter is yours, my king. Not the storm, not the snow, not the child with shadows in his blood. What comes of this will not bow to you. It will stand beside you or it will stand against you. If you are a king, you should choose the first." Stannis ground his jaw like a millstone. "If I permit this," he said to Jon, "if I give you Winterfell and the name, you give me soldiers. You give me the hill clans. You give me the wildlings without sugarcoating them. You give me the eastern shore and the ships to close White Harbor to the frays. And you give me your sword when I make my move on the bastard of Bolton. You shall have all those and more if you keep your altars away from my folk," Jon said. "You will not burn children. You will not burn men for the offense of a bloodline. I am not a monster." "Not being a monster is not enough," Jon said. "Promise me, before your red god and my silent ones." Stannis's mouth thinned further, but he said the words. Men heard them, and words have a way of choosing their own life afterward. It was not a southern wedding. The godswood they chose was not Castle Black's parody, but a shag of old trees 3 miles inside the forest where the snow had drifted deep and the trunks leaned in like conspirators. Men came quietly and cleared a path. Women came with torches. Children came, wide-eyed, and made a game of stamping footprints in the clean spaces. Jon wore no mail. Only a good plain will surcoat the color of iron and a gray cloak that might have been any ranger's. Val wore her hides and a belt of bone and antler. Her hair was unbound down her back, and it glowed dully like a spear haft in the firelight. Tormund stood between them like a stump wider than a man ought to be. His beard combed and his hair scraped back with bare grease to make it a kind of fashion. The Red Woman did not come. The king sent Lord Davos in his stead. A gray sea in a man's eyes, a quiet courtesy in his mouth. "Don't expect bells," Tormund announced. "And don't expect kneeling. There's none of that under the sky. We will have bread, though." He hefted a round loaf the size of a child's skull. "Bread is honest. Bread's done more for men than half the kings I've known." He broke it and gave them each a piece. They dipped the bread in salt. Val took a bite and smiled. "Good," she said. "You didn't put anything foolish in it." "You get the words?" Tormund asked, eyeing Jon suspiciously, as if he might slaughter the ritual with pronunciation. "I know the heart of them," Jon said. "The old gods have no priests," he thought. "They have only watchers." "I take you into my fire and my cold," he said to Val. "I take your days and give you mine. I will not go from you while we breathe the same air and the same ice bites us both." She watched him in that way she had that made him feel carved. "I take your breaths," she said, "and your hunger, and your knife when you need me to sharpen it. I will not let go of your hand in darkness. If you die, I will wear your name on my teeth and my children will learn it. And if you live, I will tell you when you are a fool." Some men laughed at that, which loosened the world in a good way. Tormund tied a thong of soft hide around their wrists and nodded as if he had cut a decent joint off an old moose. "There," he said, "there. If the world comes down, it will come down on both of you. If it lifts, same. Now drink and eat and sing if you've breath left." They drank. The sour goat's milk went to Jon's head like a polite fist, and the smell of pine smoked his lungs. The air grew less cold or they grew more. Men came to clap his shoulders. Ed with a sentence like a gravestone rubbing, Yarwick with a reluctant grunt, Othel with his mouth a twist that never softened. Bowen did not come. Melisandre lingered at the tree line, a dark smear under a darker branch, and did not smile. Stannis' envoy offered bread and respect and then slipped away as if he knew the night belonged to other gods. Val danced with the spearwives, fleet and laughing. Jon watched her hips and thought of nothing and everything and the shape a family makes when it sleeps. Later she came to him with cheeks red from cold and heat, breath-making fogs that touched his lips, and put her forehead to his. "Good," she said, and kissed him once and then again. He did not tell her about the way he woke in the middle of the night with the idea in his mouth whole and plain as a nut, that his stepping down must be done as cleanly as this had been done. He must not find himself both Lord Commander and husband, caught between axles with his legs splayed. He must make one thing of himself and do it. The next morning he called them again into the common hall. He stood with Ghost at his side, hand to the direwolf's scruff, and waited until the noise folded itself into silence. "I resign the office of Lord Commander of the Night's Watch," he said. He had thought it would be like cutting flesh. Instead, it was like letting out a breath he had stored for years. "By right of the brother's voice, I do not appoint a successor. I ask you to choose one of your number who knows the watch and the winters behind it. There is work at Hardhome. There is work at the other castles. There is work watching the dead to the north and the living to the south. Choose well." Yarwick made a strangled noise. Septon Celador's mouth fell open like a fish's. Bowen Marsh's face did not move. "You cannot do this," Bowen said after a while. "You pledged your life." "I pledged my life to defend the realms of men," Jon said. "I mean to keep that pledge. I will do it better this way. The free folk accept me. The North will accept me if Stannis keeps his word. I can unite them. Someone must. You think yourself a king. I think myself necessary," Jon said, and the sentence made him less afraid. "You cannot choose the manner of your leaving," Bowen said. "Deserters are hanged," Jon said. "If you call me deserter, do it. If your brothers agree, do it. Take me out to the yard and put a rope about my neck. I won't fight you. I won't run." Bowen's eyes flickered. The room breathed, long and low. Ed's hand was on the table. Fingers spread as if he steadied himself. Someone laughed. It was Tormund, of course, big shoulders rocking. "Ha!" he said. "Bowen Marsh. Did you think you had a boy? You've a man, and he offers you his neck. Best take care you have a rope worth the other end of it." In the end, they did not hang him. In the end, Ed was chosen to keep the castle until the vote could settle more permanently. "It was either me or the barrel of stones in the yard," Ed said, bleakly pleased. "The barrel didn't want it." Jon went to Stannis, took the paper that mattered, a name made solid with a king's seal. He let the wax cool and felt Winterfell close around his throat like a familiar collar. Lord Davos watched him sign and made a small motion that might have been a nod or a blessing. They rode within the week, free folk marching and whooping and singing in a way that was not really singing, only noise pushed through with life until it made its own tune. The giants came, one at the fore, a moving cliff on which snow gathered. The mountain clans joined them in ones and twos at first, men in patched leathers with axes older than their grandfathers, and then in bands under banners rougher than the old silk of lords. Little Walder's kin did not come. Their oaths were elsewhere. The sky grew colder as they went south, each morning a new tightness in the air, the breath of the land closing. In Mole's town, Alice Karstark found them. She came with her hair wild, the black of it full of snow, cheeks hollow with hunger and fear, chin set like the pommel of a small dagger. Two men in dirty mail, their faces closed, followed her like wolves that had already chosen the throat they would take. She ran to Jon like a child when she saw him, and then remembered that she had run and straightened with pride so sharp it was a weapon. "They mean to sell me to my uncle," she said, breath lessening, "for his son, to keep a castle from a girl. I'm no man's chattel." Jon took her cold hands in his. "No, you aren't." He saw Val watching from a little to the side, head slightly cocked. "She'd do," Val murmured to him later under the lee of the brewhouse, where the wind only cut their throats instead of their whole faces. "For a chief. Sigorn is a king's son," Jon said. "Of a sort." "Of a sort," she agreed, smiling. "A good sort. They'd make tall sons. Maybe daughters taller. Tall enough to see in snow. You welded one thing. Weld another. You're going to wear that hammer out." He did not wear it out, but it felt well used. In a cold hall with a weirwood stick stuck in a clay jar to mark blessing, they made a match that was more than a marriage. Alice stood between Sigorn and the old gods with her jaw set and her eyes softening. Jon watched Val watching her, saw the little nod of satisfaction when the girl set her palm against the then's chest. Bread, Jon thought. People will come to bread. And to the sound of girls laughing without fear. They turned west. Deepwood Motte lay under carved snow, the pines around it whispering in their sleep. Stannis had left men there and taken some and lost more. and his cautious style had been swallowed by the sudden hunger of winter. They found him near the crofters' village. Sod houses crouched under drifts, the lake frozen to a milky mirror with wind-burned crusts where the snow had chased itself. Men of the south had written books about tactics and grand maneuvers. The best thing about books, Jon had learned from Sam, was that they could be burned for warmth if you had no better use. They made better use. Ravens flitted between the camp and the treeline like thrown knives. The Frey's banners shivered in the snow, blue on gray. The leaping won an insult that would not mend. Manderley's men had joined with their white mermen, their hearts hot under their cold, grim faces. The Boltons sat brooding in Winterfell. The bastard's pink letter had come and been crumpled and smoothed and read again until the ink bled like the wounds it promised. Jon had taken that threat and set fire to it, and it warmed his gloves for a breath and was gone. The girl called Arya was not Arya at all. The world had made a farce of names and cloaked them in wolfskins to keep them breathing. He meant to fetch her from that farce if he could, because men ought not be ruined by the jokes of other men. He and Stannis walked the edge of the lake with the wind worrying at their cloaks. "The ice will hold," Stannis said. "It will hold for men on foot," Jon said. "Not for the weight of horses. Not for the weight of an old grudge. We will set our grudge on skates," Stannis said. He yanked his gloves tighter. "Draw them out onto the lake. Let them think us fools and then hear the ice sing." The ice sang, true enough. It sang in high notes that made men's back teeth ache, and then in a dull low boom that was the end of anything standing on it. The Freys had come forward eager, boots thudding, proud as meat on a rich man's plate, and the lake took them. Under bowshot, under the low hiss of arrows and the white gust of breath, the surface cracked in lines that were more beautiful than any tapestry and then opened like a punished mouth. Men went down. The sound of them was human, and then it wasn't. He moved forward into the second rank with Tormund bellowing like a happy bull at his side. Val somewhere to his right with spear wives under her. One behind him like a walking wall with hatred in its joints. A Fry rushed him, mouth open wide, sword swinging too high. Jon let the blade glance off his raised edge, stepped in, and put Longclaw across the man's belly. The feel was the same as any other body. The blood was the same temperature. He tried never to forget the samenesses. On the far side of the lake, the bastard sent men to toy with a crofter's hut that had sheltered peasants going back 6 generations. Jon saw the fire catch and then die under a sudden dump of snow shaken down by a giant's hand, and saw one grin like an avalanche. He leaped a ditch, feet biting into the packed snow, and met a man in flayedman livery whose eyes were very blue with cold and something else. Jon took the man's sword on the guard of Longclaw and felt the jolt up his arm. He stepped left and put his shoulder into the man to unbalance him, then cut low. The unkindness of it was that it was easier in the cold. Men didn't scream long. Later, the ash of burned shields. Later, the white flags that were not flags at all but shirts tied to spears. Later, a boy with a scar that twisted his half-grown features into a map of all the hurt he had seen standing with another whose hands shook. Later, snow in his mouth and the sense of it melting to water that tasted of pennies. Val found him with blood crusted on her cheek and laughter on her breath that was not joy but not entirely unlike. "You fight like a Southron," she said. "Too much thinking, but you move like a man who's danced in snow." "I never learned the southern steps," he said. "You never will," she promised, and kissed his ear even as the smell of spilled bowels drifted on the wind. When they took Winterfell, it was not with banners raised and horns blown, but with men pulling doors from hinges and women pushing fire through arrow slits, and a giant shoulder set against a gate that had been proud for 300 years. The bastard had fled already, a shadow on a snowfield notched along the edges by the wind. Some men swore they'd seen him riding with wolves, black shapes across white. Others said he had turned white himself and gone to live in the belly of winter. The truth would show its face later, as truths did. Inside the walls, Jon found the girl who was not Arya. Jane's feet were torn where she had run on ice, and she shook like a woman at the end of a fever. She looked at him and could not quite grasp his name. He wrapped her in his cloak and put her by the kitchen hearth and asked Manderley's maester for blankets and meat and not questions. "My lord," the maester said, and in that my lord was a history, and in the way he gave it was a way forward. The north bent slowly. The clans did not kneel, but they stood closer. Letters came from White Harbor that smelled of salt and old fish oil. The marks on them were fat and careful. Lord Wyman sent bread and meat and men who knew when to keep their mouths shut. From the Dreadfort came nothing. From the Umbers came 2 letters, each swearing something different, both sealed with the same thick hand. From Skagos, only rumor, always rumor. Always a wolf's name whispered through cracked lips by a man who did not know how to write it. He and Val lay under a roof of old pine beams and listened to snow shifting on slate. Ghost lay against the door as if the night might push inward. Ghost's breath was their clock. For the first time since his father had left him at the wall, Jon felt the weight of stone above and around him that had nothing to do with towers and everything to do with the house's patience. "You did it," Val said, propped on an elbow, hair loose, eyes lit by the banked coals as if they themselves burned. "Now what?" "Food," he said. "The winter town is empty except for cats. We bring folk in from the hills. We make them porridge. We'll need crop to seed when the snows release. We'll need to keep your people near, on the new gift lands, the little steadings along the long lake. They can hunt and we'll hunt with them." She nodded into the pillow. "And the dead. We plant obsidian in stockpiles and put it into every hand that will take it. We teach men to aim for the blue ones first. We watch the trees. They're watching us," she said and closed her eyes. "They don't blink." They did not. News from Eastwatch grew worse, then better, then worse again. Cotter Pike's notes lost their curses and grew spare, which frightened Jon more than any storm of words. Hardhome was ash and bone. The sea stood colder than it had ever been known to stand. And sometimes, on days when the wind took a certain shape, men on the wall heard horns that no living man blew. When the others came to the last river, they came like fog learning to walk. Men's arrows stuck in chests of ice and hung there quivering as if embarrassed to be seen. The first sight of them made the bravest look like boys newly whipped. Jon rode out with Tormund, with the hill clans, with Umbers and Serwins and Manderleys and Thens, and a giant hulking behind them wearing a piece of a broken door on a thong around his neck as a charm. Val walked beside the spearman, steps steady, eyes alert and angry. The cold in a man is one thing. The cold outside a man is another. The cold that moves toward you wearing a man's face as a mask is a third thing entirely. Jon met it with long claw and felt nothing travel up his blade. The resistance was like cutting glass with silk. Only when the edge met the inside of the other's wrist did the air itself seem to spark. The shattered shards fell without sound. The whites that had clustered around the blue ones stiffened and then staggered and then fell still. Jon took a breath that did not go all the way to his feet and stepped back. Val had driven her spear through a white's throat and was turning as if to spit a joke. She saw the thing behind Jon and did not call his name. She struck, and her spear skidded off invisible armor and cut her thumb in a bright line. Ghost came from the side like a thrown stone, the whole of him a white violence. He knocked the other sideways long enough for Tormund to swing his bronze-headed axe, the only head that mattered, and crush shoulder into arm until the thing's upper half came away like fallen ice from a roof. When it died, it burned nothing. It simply forgot to be. "Good," Val said between breaths. "Good. Now we know. You cut your hand," Jon said, forgetting between one heartbeat and the next that they were surrounded by the dead that remembered walking. She looked at the blood and shrugged, though he could see the tremor in the fingers. "It will scab into a story," she said. "We will need stories for the children to be stubborn with." They drove them back that day, though driving may be too proud a word for standing one place until the enemy got bored of loneliness and left. The dead seemed to learn and unlearn in patterns. Jon learned that if he kept a line too long in one spot, the whites would find a drift with a shape to its shadow and pour through like water. He learned that sometimes men needed to be made to sing whether they believed or not, because a song keeps their teeth from chattering and their hands from forgetting the hilt's feel. He learned how often a story of heroism is not the story of a man swinging a sword but of a girl carrying a pot from one fire to another without spilling. They took losses like a sea takes pebbles. They buried what they could and burned what they could, and sometimes they did neither because the ground would not accept the one and the wind would not permit the other. The winter set more closely. The house's patience became a kind of ache. And then, as if the world had been instructed to provide the kind of hope that men find credible, a raven came crooked and exhausted and fell into the snow of Winterfell's inner yard to be rescued by a boy with the body of a man. The message tied to its leg had been written in a hand Jon knew only by reputation. Crabbed letters, ink plentiful but unproud, words chosen with a lawyer's bitter care. Lord Wyman wrote that a ship had put off from Skagos, pricked wolves from its wake. Wolves, Val said, reading over his shoulder. She smelled like smoke and the clean oil of leather. She had a bandage around her thumb. Boys, Jon said. He did not say names. The air around a name sometimes bruises it. The Skagos ship came slow, a wet black seam at the horizon that widened into a hull, and one morning when the sky had decided to give them a sun like a cracked coin, the ship came up along the White Knife as far as ships could go, and then men took to the shore in boats that had skins stretched over ribs and gave themselves to the river as if it were mercy. Rickon Stark came among them with hair as wild as the island he had grown on and eyes that were old for something older than politics. He had a dire wolf the color of ash who hid himself under a dock and would not come out for 3 days. Jon went down to the river without his cloak. The cold reached inside him and sat. Rickon looked at him and did not know if he should fling himself into that familiar strange embrace. So Jon went half the way and waited, and then the boy came the rest. The wolf crawled another foot from under the dock and showed a tooth, then closed his eyes as if he could not watch what would happen. "You've grown," Jon said stupidly, because there are no better words when the room is too small for the truth. "You smell like dog," Rickon said, and then, after a moment in which his mouth tried to decide between tears and derision, chose derision and added, "And woman." "Both true," Jon said. Later they spoke names in the great hall under banners that the wind could not find. There were faces there that warmed at Rickon's name, faces that closed, faces that argued by shifting in place as if each man's mind had been born with a chair that scraped the floor when moved. "You are still Lord of Winterfell," Stannis said. He had a stink of someone who knew his fortress had suddenly sprouted 2 doors. "You do not yield it to a boy because he walked out of a tale." "I do not yield anything," Jon said. He did not raise his voice. "I give. I have a house. It is this one. It has a name. It has a heartbeat that is older than me. I will not set it aside because paper admits me to it. I will keep it because it needs keeping and because the boy with my blood needs a man behind him who is not a liar." That set the suits of armor in men's eyes to shifting again. Some unlatched, some buckled tighter. Manderley watched as if watching a piece of fish take a hook. Davos stood as if ready to move either way, a man used to ropes. Val leaned against a pillar and watched the room watch him. When it had bled to quiet, she came to him on feet that had the weight of certainty. "Good," she said. "A king from your stories would have kept the chair for himself and made himself a song. You'll make a story that keeps children warm. That's better. I'm no king." "No," she said. "You had a chance to be. It's why I said yes." He blinked. "You married me because I declined a crown." "I married you because you're the sort of man that makes winter less cruel," she said. "And because you look tolerable without your shirt. But mostly the first thing. That winter was a book with pages too close to turn." They fought the others as a man fights a fever, sweating and shivering and never sure what the day will bring from their sleeve. They trained boys until they moved like men, and then they sent them to stand beside their fathers. They taught girls to carry water and pull arrows, and then they put axes in their hands as well and watched some of them split logs with faces that learned to be patient and then strike. They salted meat until the salt itself seemed a treasure. They sang when men died because silence grows fat on grief and makes you less for it. Jon's hand found Val's in the dark more nights than not. He learned the shape of her calluses and what made her laugh in a way she let no one else hear, and how she liked her porridge and what set her teeth on edge. He learned that she would go alone to a tree 2 miles from the walls and climb it and sit until the dead had stopped their passage in the lower wood. And he learned not to follow her unless the wind put a warning in his mouth. "You're not a bird," she told him when he trailed her once despite his own rules. You're a wolf pretending to be a crow, pretending to be a king who's pretending to be a husband. It works better when you stop pretending half of those. Which half should I stop? He asked. Start with the crow, she said, and bit his lip. Sometimes he woke with the taste of ash on his tongue. Sometimes he woke to ghost at the door with hackles high, eyes like lightning through fog, and then he knew it would be one of the nights when the dead came pressing against the outer hedges. Those nights his mind stood in two places, one with the men looking out and one with the men looking within, counting the breaths of sleeping children as if the sum of them could be counted into safety. Those nights he found himself thinking about his father's head bent over a map of the world as it might one day be again, and about his mother as an absence he had learned to understand as a kind of present. News traveled oddly. Reports came to Winterfell of dead things in the swamps of the Neck that could not seem to find purchase on that soft, treacherous ground and laid themselves down in confusion until a Crannogman ran a spear through their skulls because he thought it might help. Sometimes the sea would throw up a shape on the pebbled beaches of White Harbor that had once been a man and now was a problem, and Manderley's people would set the shape alight with a dignified efficiency. Once, just once, a raven brought word from the Vale that the green there had held because the mountains had circled their wagons and told winter to go around. The raven died in the night, and Jon did not like the look of the feathers it left. He and Val did not speak often about children. The winter had taken so many that even the word felt like a betrayal. Yet when she told him, her voice casual as if she were commenting on soup, he felt the blood in his throat and the sting behind his eyes and the place in his mouth where his teeth had wanted to be smiles more than soldiers. Boy or girl? He asked, and then laughed at himself, a sound like breaking a thin sheet of ice. Child, she said. Stubborn. You're doing. Yours, he shot back. Both, she said. That's the point of this sort of thing. By then the others had learned too much about them and they about the others. They had obsidian spearheads in canvas sacks in every tower and deposit until the very air in the guardrooms smelled of chipped glass. They had 2 swords that might bite more than ordinary lives could bite. They had a castle that remembered wars the men in it did not. They had, above all, the sense that they belonged to one another in a way that winter could not steal without having to fight for it. He stood again on a wall not of ice but of stone and looked north. The aurora made a thin bruise on the sky, green as old copper. Ghost's breath smoked out in slow plumes, and Jon could count to 5 between them and hear his own heart beat in those spaces. Val came to stand beside him with her cloak slung messily and her feet in boots he had once told her were too big for her, and she had told him to go boil his head. Still your wall, she said. All I can see are walls, he answered. She nodded. They're useful. For sleeping behind, for standing on, for talking through, for knocking down when they forget why they were built. She leaned her shoulder into his and stared a long time. You going to say it? What? That you're glad, that you did this, that we did it. He took a breath that finally reached his feet. Yes, he said, I am glad, even with all of it, especially with all of it. Good, she said. Now tell the old gods before the red woman thinks she did it in her bowl of coals. Let her have her fires, Jon said. We have ours. They had theirs, and in that having there was a resistance that had nothing to do with spears. When spring finally came, it would be like a tired mare that had been asked to pull too long. It would come halting and suspicious, and men would not know what to do with the softness under their boots. Yet there would be planting. Helms would go on nails above the hearth. Children would be born with eyes that had not yet learned to look for knives in shadows. The dead would reduce themselves to stories told around the last of the stored tallow, and the stories would grow in their telling until they had the decency to be unreal. Until then, the work ahead. When Val's labor found her, it found her in a day of small quiet. Men fixing a hinge, women counting onions in a cellar as if each were a worry bead. She went to the little room where the stones were warmest and leaned her forehead to the wall and made the sounds only women can make when building the future out of their own bodies. He stood outside with his hands and his breath and his thoughts, and Ghost lay with his nose under the crack and made the low sound that mothers make. Tormund came and stood with him. The big man's eyes were soft, the mean around them gone as if scraped away. "You did it," he said, as if they were over-sitting on a stump and had all the time in the world. "We did it," Jon said. "You married well. The girl made a queen out of your land and a land out of your queen. When the world came looking for you, you had something to give it." Jon shut his eyes, opened them. "We did it," he said again. The baby arrived with a cry that made every other sound in the hall step back. The midwife opened the door and scolded him without heat and then pushed him into a room full of steam. The child was the color of wet wine lees and the shape of a question that had been answered. Val's hair lay dark with sweat, and her smile was lightly savage. "Girl," she said, "stubborn. She bit me." "Good," Jon said. He bent to kiss the child's brow and his wife's mouth and the fingers that would one day carry a knife or a spindle or both. "Good." He stood later in the doorway with Ghost, who had finally permitted himself a wag of the tail so slow it was almost invisible. The night outside had softened, just for an hour, into something that remembered how to be gentle. He could smell wood and wool and milk and something like hope when hope wears a plain dress. The old gods watched and did not blink. "I will tell you a thing," he whispered to the sleeping child who would not hear him and would not care yet. One tells children things often enough that the words begin to stick in the boards. Once there were two peoples who thought they hated each other. They were wrong. They were too alike not to love. It took winter to tell them so. Took your mother to shout it into my head. Now we will show you both the places where the trees are kind and the places where they are not. We will teach you to listen to the wind. We will teach you to hold bread out to a stranger. If they throw it back, we'll not forget. If they take it and eat and thank you, remember that too. Val dreamed and muttered and woke and smiled. The child slept. The house breathed. Outside, the wind went away to think of other things. The wall still stood. The sea still lifted and set down. It had been doing that work since before love had a word. Jon leaned his head against the stone and felt it cool his skin. And he knew, then, not something that a red woman had shown him or an ancient tree had breathed, but something that had come up slow through the soles of his feet. This is what keeping looks like. He turned back into the room shaped of old timber and the laughter of women and the sound of a child, and the wolf followed him on soft winter feet.